Okay. So we all love a good action movie, a good police procedural, action, adventure, shootouts, and all that other stuff. Yeah, but the thing about it is, if you really think about it, is it's all fiction. And the problem, part of the problem is that we've kind of confused fiction for reality. Fiction works the way it does often enough because, well, writers like me can be lazy. You know, we follow what we've seen in other stories rather than doing meticulously researched sort of um, work from you know from reality. And I think this is part of sorry. I think this is part of the problem with how things are going right now in this country is that we got an idea of how cops and other figures like that should behave. We got it from basically Hollywood dreams. They love to hate on Hollywood. It's a good applause line for conservatives who have been taught to regard Hollywood as a Babylon. I won't say that Hollywood is a bastion of morality, and it's just like any other place where there's money, power, influence concentrated. There's always corruption is always going to follow that. But we've kind of been trained on this idea of the renegade cop, you know, Dirty Harry being sort of the kind of the trope codifier, if you will. And the problem with this is, you know, it's like a screenwriter can predetermine any outcome they want. So, torturing a suspect can get information. Why? And accurate information too. Why? Well, because somebody wrote it down that way. You have the hero cop stands on the bullet wound in the thigh of the killer and presses down until he gets the answers he wants. Yeah, the writer can go and cut to them finding the body of the young woman he's murdered. And we can do that. We've seen that many times. We see it in Lethal Weapon 3, where enraged by the fact that he had to shoot his son's friend, um, he goes on a rampage. He threatens a guy, I think, with a spinning tire, car's tire, and this is shown to be him getting tough with them. And you know, but here's the thing: in reality, you torture somebody like that, and they may just give you some false information to get you off their back. Thinking, oh, I can run away later, or the next time he sees me, I'll be in a jail, and they can't do anything to me in there, or something like that. What torture in real life gets people is compliance. But compliance isn't the same thing as you know, as giving you the information you want. Or rather, it is giving you the information you want, but you have to be careful about how you define the information you want, because that information could just, and you know, I mean, here's the principle: information, lies and truths, and people talking out of their butts about what's true or not are all information. They're all equally information. They take up the same amount of bandwidth to deliver to you, whether that's in the form of a print, manuscript, um, a video, whatever. There is no guarantee of truthfulness that you can speak of in any medium. If you can use it to pass on information, you can use it to pass on false information. If you can, and you don't even have to have people intend to pass on false information. They can just do so because they don't know what they're talking about. So, but with torture, a person can basically just tell you what you want to hear. Literally, they'll just go, "Oh, this person wants me to say it's X or Y. I'll say it's X or Y, and that will get him off my back." This is the thing, but it speaks to something larger than this. We've developed this cultural idea of the renegade cop as being the good guy who won't let rules stand in the way of doing the right thing. And that's a thing that the that's a thing again where the screenwriter can guarantee this because the screenwriter is determining everything, that the determining who the characters are, what they're who they are inside, what's in their hearts, what's in their minds. They're basically acting like God in a way, but within the scope of the story. So they can make sure that the ones who are breaking the rules, who are kicking down doors that they don't have a warrant to kick down, that they're going after the right people, that they haven't made a terrible mistake, that they're not, in fact, finding and torturing somebody who doesn't know anything, who isn't actually involved. That's a thing right there. A screenwriter can guarantee it because they can guarantee the cause, that the chain of causality from one step to another. They can guarantee that the cop went after the right person. They can guarantee that the cop knew, what was true and was able to get the added details that they wanted. They can ensure that success and good character are involved in all these things. The writer has to deliberately decide, oh no, the cop's going to be mistaken. Oh no, the cop's going to uh, inadvertently torture the wrong person. Oh no, the cop's going to kill an innocent person here. Oh no, this and this and that. The point is, this has to be a deliberate feature of the story in order for that to happen. But here out in the real world, there are no such guarantees. The writer of our story, he's not writing for any audience. And he is not afraid to allow evil people to do evil things or clueless people to do clueless things. Well, it's whether it's malice or stupidity, whether it's overzealousness or whatever, the we are not guaranteed any kind of protection from the flaws and the mistakes and the evils that a person enforcing the law can do against us. This is why we created the Bill of Rights. This is why people came together and said, this is a good idea because they understood from better experience that, the people enforcing the law don't necessarily do so with the public's interest in mind. There is no guarantee of the character. We've seen bad cops. We've seen corrupt law enforcement officials. It's not some hypothetical, but at least there is some degree of feedback, some degree of process by which their bad actions can be undone, by which they can be held accountable. Or at least that's what we hope. This is, I think, when it comes down to it, the problem of letting ice off the leash. Some people think that it will let them do their job more efficiently, that they'll be able to purge all the undocumented immigrants that have, you know, abused our hospitality. You know, that we will be able to, enforce our borders, close those borders. This is the this is what we've been sold. People will often sell us on a loss of freedom, a loss of privacy, a loss of ability to be secure in our homes and our communications, even walking down the street. Our right to walk down the street and not be asked by somebody to prove that we belong here. Even that is under threat. And folks are too wrapped up in this mythology of, sealing the border, protecting the homeland, so on and so forth. You're too wrapped up in that to realize that what they're yielding is part of what we were gifted. What makes us Americans. This is the problem with bootlicking ice. You think it's just going to be somebody else. You think it's going to be other people who will be made to suffer. There'll be other people with wrong ideas, with wrong ro- fates. The blue hairs, which means a different thing these days. When you talk about somebody with blue hair, when I was a kid, you were talking about old ladies, with hair treatments that had you know made it their hair look different. Nowadays, it's young young women with you know punkish hair color. uh, you know, but to get back on topic, folks think that it will be the liberals, the people like me, in terms of my politics, that we're going to be the ones that suffer. But if you look at history in places where the authorities have taken over, where the law doesn't have to obey any such limits, that they can be as harsh as they want to be, does that protect the average person? Does that protect the true believer? And the answer is no. Once you let somebody have that kind of untrammeled power, that kind of unrestricted ability to invade your life, you it's like inviting a vampire into your home. Once you've asked them and you're not exactly going to get an opportunity to peacefully show them the door. Once they can use that power on someone, they can use it on you. Understand that? They can use it on you. Because once I mean it's sort of it's sort of like a you're kind of getting progressively hemmed in. Once they can violate anybody's due process, anybody's habeas corpus rights, then even an undocumented immigrant. What does it mean if they can violate their due process rights? Well, it means that they can take hold of that person without having to demonstrate that it is legitimate for them to take hold of that person. But what does that mean? Well, it means that why would they have the authority to take hold of that person if they're ICE? Because they're an illegal immigrant, or because their visa is expired, or whatever. Well, if they don't have to demonstrate that somebody is actually an undocumented immigrant, that their visa has expired, in order to detain them, in order to take hold of them, then it no longer makes a difference whether that person had a visa, whether that person is actually a citizen, because they don't have to go through the due process to prove that the person is in the country legally. They don't have to prove that. And that is where it starts to creep in. So, okay, now, well, if they don't have due process rights, then you don't have to worry about warrants. You don't have to worry about, or if you do, it's administrative warrants, which basically it's them issuing them to themselves. They're the judge in their cause. What do you think they're going to do? We can kind of, and we get to a point. Okay, well, what does it matter anymore? What they do, who they take? We're having citizens picked up. We're having people who don't have any imaginable reason to be picked up. Who are full citizens, who are born citizens. And at that point, it's just once you can pick up a citizen without any reason, without any cause, once you can kick down a door without having to without having to establish that there was a person breaking the law in there, that they needed to be arrested in such, probable cause. Once you can bypass that, you are in a position where there, the guarantees of the Constitution just no longer mean anything. And this is the sort of thing. There's a kind of there's a kind of there's a kind of question at that point. What does it mean to have? I mean, the basic subject of this was, what happens. Okay, the symmetry of it, really. It's easy to be on the side of a rebel when that rebel is basically in charge of themselves, when they're trying to be free themselves, when they're trying to fight back against an authority that is corruptly suppressing them. And that's what they often try to appeal to. But what happens when the rebels take charge? What happens when the rule breakers are the ones who are supposed to carry out the rules? And the rules are what's protecting us. And that's what they're breaking. So, oddly enough, once you turn this thing around, it's not symmetrical. It's not symmetrical. The folks who were fine who appeal to us as, rule breakers from the one side, all of a sudden, when it's them breaking the rules that protect us from them or from anybody in that office, when they're breaking the rules that keep us, free, well, then it doesn't look so punkish, so rebellious anymore. Now they're the authority. Now they're the ones who are coming down like a sack of bricks on the average person, on the folks who are trying to be free. And there's the irony there that this sort of, Hollywood in the late 60s, early 70s, and onwards has sort of loved to mythologize the rule breaker, loved to mythologize the disruptor. And that's all well and good until suddenly they're suddenly the ones that we count upon to preserve the country, to preserve its order, to preserve its peace and tranquility, the ones we wanted to, kind of reform things, but kind of keep things fair and good, and keep the government restrained. Now these people are the people who now the rebellion has become the empire. And this is the irony of it all. One could say that power, it's different how people are with power and without power. And you get a situation where having gotten power, I mean, you have Trump. Trump, you know, he, as a personality, as a public figure, he was he sort of appealed to people because he was brash, he was, willing to hold people accountable, you're fired, da 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 da. But now that you've handed that guy power, what is he like? He's like a tyrant because it all looks different from from the other perspective. When when he's basically firing all the people who are supposed to keep the operation of government in line. The inspector generals, he went and fired them all. When he's keeping secrets, and the secrets he's keeping are basically just the corrupt crap he's done. People need to realize that these archetypes, these sort of rebel archetypes, that a figure that might be entertaining or innocuous when they don't have power, they can turn around and become a hazard to you when they do have power. And I think that that is one of the critical lessons that we're going to have to learn from this day and age. And that is that power looks a lot different when when you are at the end of the barrel of that gun. Power looks a lot different when it's your life that they tear apart. But in a way, we're sort of in that day and age, that was sort of the day and age when the lead poisoning from leaded gasoline was at its height, from leaded paint and all that other stuff. That was, when the violence was, hundreds of people being murdered, every, maybe even over 1,000 people murdered every year in a big city. When the violence seemed so overwhelming, and you know gangs were roving and drugs were proliferating and all that. It's it can seem like a good thing to hand a lot of power to people in order to solve that. The problem is that not everybody you hand power to actually wants to solve anybody else's problems but their own. And if you can't hold them back, if you can't tell them no about anything, if their power isn't conditional about, you know, on them doing, proving something, proving that they should be able to use that power, then sooner or later you'll find out the hard way that what looks like justice from one perspective, from one direction, you're taking the perspective of the cop. What looks like justice in one direction looks like corruption, looks like excessive brutality, looks like authoritarian tyranny from the other direction. This is part of what we have to learn. This is part of the wisdom of the Constitution, is that it was written by people who understood that who understood that people need protection from power. People need protection from their government just as much as they need protection from their government, you know? Protection from the government, protection from what they could do to you if they're able to abuse their power. It's protection from the government in terms of law enforcement. We need both. We need freedom. We need laws to be maintained, to be carried out. The framers didn't have the wrong idea. Madison didn't have the wrong idea. They understood that power must be conditional. The power of the government must be conditional. Because otherwise, if you have unconditional power, then you have no protection. While these days, I mean, going back to the examples of the Soviet Union, the Nazis. When the Nazis took power in part on the back of a group that is informally known as the Brown Shirts. Um, the let's see, the and I don't really have good German, so Sturmabteilung, literally storm division, or loosely stormtroopers. Yes. Uh, George Lucas got the name from somewhere. They were kind of a knockoff of Mussolini's black shirts, but they were led by a guy. Let's see, named. Let's see. Let me see. Ernst Röhm, I think is his name. Rohm. Rom. He was gay, but he was also, well, not exactly the most democratic of people, if you will. He he was part of Hitler's rise, of the Nazis' rise. His people, his black shirts, they were street thugs basically. So what did, did were the Nazis ultimately grateful to them? No, when the time came in June of 1934, there was a purge known as the Night of the Long Knives, which basically was the brown shirts getting either either co-opted into the other organizations or just being killed. Basically, he was killed in his cell. He was arrested, and according to this Wikipedia article, they returned to find him standing with his bare chest puffed out in a gesture of defiance. The SS officers then shot and killed him in the cell. And this is something that they had known that he was gay for years, but they didn't care as long as he was, building them up. So as long as he was supporting their rise to power, they were fine. You know, but what happened? Well, once they got that power, the thugs on the street were no longer a plus; they were a liability. So guess what? After all that Rome and his people did for them, he had them shot. And there were plenty of people, I imagine, loyal Nazis who found their lives treated as nothing more than tissue paper, because that's what a totalitarian government can do. You are not important anymore. Your life means nothing, not even in a legal sense. This is you know, uh, if you look at the Soviet Union's history, it's one betrayal after another. Once the Nazis take full power, once Lenin dies, guess what happens to Trotsky? Well, he gets exiled and then ends up with a ice pick to the back of the head in Mexico. Lovely, isn't it? And you know, he turns around. Stalin turns around and purges millions of his own citizens, or lets them starve. And in the war, he you know, you're basically cannon fodder. They don't exactly do their best to make sure the lives of their soldiers are held in high regard. When you get a system where you let people have that much power over you, you're defenseless. You can't say anything, you can't do anything without inviting consequences down upon yourself. It's a nightmare, and it's a nightmare that for decades, for centuries, we've congratulated ourselves on avoiding. That's what we should, because that is the mark of a just government. That if you didn't do something wrong, you don't have to worry about anything. And it's not, oh, if you've done nothing wrong, you don't have to worry about our attention. The attention shouldn't be on anybody who hasn't done anything wrong. The idea should be reversed, that if you haven't done anything wrong, we shouldn't care about you. The cops should be going after people who are actually breaking the law. And the laws need to be laws that are fair, that allow people to live their lives for the most part, except when what they're doing harms others to an excessive degree. Like, can't have people stealing each other's property. You can't have people killing each other. You can't have people attacking other people, threatening them or blackmailing them or storing them. It's uh, can you agree with that? But the laws need to be things that are agreed upon between people and which serve the interests of the public as a whole. But you don't get that when you have a system where basically the powerful can, you know, act against people without any problem, without any inhibition, without anything holding them back. Our government needs to be held back not because we don't want it to do what we need it to do. We've got systems to unleash authority to carry out the law when it needs to be carried out. We need, though, a system where, it's sort of like with people talk about the immune system. They talk about natural immunity as if it's something amazing, and they forget that often enough, the immune system can turn on its own body, that it can start attacking what is what it's not supposed to attack, what it's supposed to protect. And there you have sort of this is sort of what law enforcement is sort of like an immune system. It can be good when it's got reason to go out there and confront microbes, confront disease, confront parasites and whatever. That's good. That's what it's supposed to do. But what happens when it's going after what it's not supposed to go after? We can liken, therefore, the we can liken an authoritarian government, a tyrannical government, to something like a autoimmune disorder, where your own tissues are being attacked by the immune system that's meant to protect them. What's happening right now, it's sort of like, yes, you need to deal with people who are in the country illegitimately, don't have the right visas, who don't have the right, you know, whatever. But if the actions that you take in order to deal with that are too out of control, then the point of all that you did is going to be defeated. It'll defeat the point, defeat the purpose that our laws and our freedoms are set up to preserve, to give us. The preamble sort of promises of our Constitution are going to go by the wayside because the immune system has gotten so, it's overreacting, it's misidentifying threats, it's doing its own thing rather than serving the purpose it was originally put there for. And that will cause inflammation. We can say that's like riots. You actually get more unrest because people are so angry at what's being done. You get more, you get a crippled economy as legitimate business, legitimate um, legitimate interests in the economy are set upon by our government. They are set upon by our people. And you get other dysfunctions, social, political, elections. You get a sort of, we can liken elections to being like when our cells multiply. And we've got a system by which we filter out the bad cells, that we filter out that sort of thing. And what happens when that goes wrong? Well, you get a cancer. When you get a system that of government where the governing officials won't answer the call of the people to step down, be replaced, when they're just working for their own purposes, their own advantages, that's not unlike a cancer. And this is the part of the problem of having this fantasy government that goes and does whatever it wants, is that ultimately a government that can do whatever it wants can do things that you don't want it to do. That gets out of your control. It gets out of your ability to constrain. So I guess if I'm going to leave you with a question, the question is, does the authority you want people to exercise, does it look as good when you're on the receiving end of it as it looks when you're on the delivering end? Does the law being broken, the folks being rebels, does it look as good when it's the president of the United States and his law enforcement bodies basically acting against the law, to break the law, to fight the law? Does that look as good from that side? Uh, a spoiled rich man using his powers, that he usually might use in a court of law where somebody can gainsay what he wants to do. And instead, he's the president, so now he's in charge of carrying out the law. I mean, that doesn't. I mean, have you heard about this thing where he's suing the government because his IRS files were leaked, and now he's saying that the government has to pay him $10 billion for that. Oh, and who's going to tell the government to settle? Oh, the guy who's being given the money. It's corrupt. A lot of things that might appeal to us as being, oh, if I had the power, I would do this. If we actually look at that in practice, it's corruption. So the question is, does power always look as good in the real world? When you're looking at it from, yeah, identifying with the people who are carrying it out, does it look as good from that end as it would look from your end when it's your 10, when it's $10 billion from the taxpayer pocket? I know. We have to separate the fantasy of what we want government to be from what it actually is when you know, when it interacts with us. Because ultimately, we can never guarantee that it's going to be in the hands of those who are sympathetic to us. And even if it is in the hands of the people that we like, that we are ideologically aligned to, they, once they get that power, all the loyalty we show them means nothing because they can easily betray that and get away with it. So don't trust in power. Don't trust that those who rebel against the rules as ordinary citizens, that it's going to look that much better when it's their job to carry out the laws, to carry out the rules. Have a good day.